Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and we're looking at BattleCry Development Milestone 5. This is going to be the introduction page or phase of the screencast. In Milestone 3, we had a recommendation to change up the way that the video presentation was done so that it was easier to digest. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I didn't have an opportunity to implement that in Milestone 4. It was brought up again in Milestone 4, so I'm making a point to change our format here in Milestone 5. As I was looking through a variety of the feedback, I started noticing some areas where maybe things I had addressed in backlog were still being readdressed in feedback. So I'm adding an introduction portion to the screencast just to sort of make sure that I'm covering not only the things that I am doing on each one of the milestones, but things that I've consciously made a decision that those are going to be taken care of from a feedback system or perspective into a later milestone, either due to time constraints or it just made more sense to work on that feedback item later. In milestone 5, and I will go over some of the backlog pieces first, I added quite a bit of backlog items into milestone 5 from the original spec on what was supposed to be developed in Milestone 5. I have similar time constraints this week. I'm flying out to Europe tomorrow, so I'm trying to get all of this wrapped up today to give me an opportunity. It's basically 14 hours of flight time. So one of the things that didn't quite make it as far as the ability to review or implement in Milestone 5 that was a feedback item from Milestone 4 is the visual debugger. So I've added this to backlog. This is definitely something I'm going to tackle in Milestone 6. I've done some research and I found some nifty code that will allow me to visually graph out the waveform from the BattleCry. So I've got a lot of the research in place. I just need time to implement it. I was noticing as I'm playing that there appears to be some unusual inconsistencies, that infantry seems to generate fewer units than cavalry than archery. And if they were divided equally, I shouldn't see that pattern. It should be more random. Archery and cavalry appears to be random, but infantry always seems to be lower than the other two. Just generally looking at the UU encoded, I'm able to see these large swashes of capital A's, which looks like maybe there's padding put in there. But one way or another, adding this visual debugging in Milestone 6, I'll give an opportunity to really analyze that and then cross-apply that across multiple battle cries that I've got stored in the database at this point. So I just wanted to point out that while that was made in Milestone 4, I just didn't have an opportunity in Milestone 5 to make that happen. So that threw into backlog. Another one was a bug regarding creating players that using emojis caused some problems. This is going to take a little bit of wrenching into place. I think I see where the problem is, as it's sort of a cultural problem between the character set and then going down to sequel. But I just need some time to bang on it. So I threw it into a bug and put it into the backlog. Oops. So this is the current backlog list. It is getting quite large, but feel free to go through there if there's something you think that I've overlooked or did not address. I wanted to make sure and point out that that's kind of where I'm putting those items. In addition to that, this is the Milestone 5, so we're going to be looking at the ability to add friends lists within a playable game. We've activated the game settings panel in Milestone 5, so you'll be able to change your display name, silence players, which essentially is just going to gray out other players' audio icons so you don't have to listen to them, and the ability to wipe out your account. And this sort of goes back to another video you're going to see where I do a redo on the scheduler from Milestone 4. I didn't do a great job at really describing how all that works. So, but essentially it builds the piping for doing these maintenance events early evening, throwing that into backlog. All the piping's there. It's just a maintenance task item and a change to a storm procedure to make it happen. So while it needs to be done, it's not something that's pressing on my mind right now. The ability to use heroes and buffs in combat. So we saw in Milestone 4 the ability to purchase heroes, the ability to purchase buffs. You can now go and pick and choose them based on the rules of the TDD to be able to implement them in combat. Being able to reinforce garrisons, move friendly units to friendly sectors is in this milestone. The generation of resources after conquest, so that's now well tested as we're conquering territory. We can confirm that we're getting those resources. Giving the player the ability to surrender the game, and that sort of conspires to a backlog item that I had, which gives the player the ability to delete pending games. I'll have to find out where that is. But this gives them basically the ability, when I surrender the game is shifted to the other player as a win. If I surrender, I take a loss, and then it goes into the completed games. When a player takes the opponent's castle, that's victory, so we now have the ability to win a game, and essentially that does the same thing except for the fact that I win rather than surrendering the game. Allow buffs to be added to the garrison. So I can now assign up to 3 buffs to a hex. Give players the ability to revoke a challenge pending or open. I describe in detail that really all you're ever doing is giving the person the ability to delete a pending game. An open game wouldn't even be in my open list, right? If it's an open game, it's shown to other people. So the only game I should tangibly be able to delete is the pending games, whether it's one that I created or a challenge that was created to me. But as long as it's in my pending game list, I should be able to delete it. And essentially what I'm calling that is a revoke. And you'll see that sort of described a little bit in the redo of the scheduler from Milestone 4. Allow players to abort combat. So I've gone into combat, but I haven't created the BattleCry yet. Give me the way to get out of there. That was just an oversight from Milestone 4. List identification, adding little headers to the top of the lists, making the list a little bit easier to understand what's in this list, what's in that list. So I added some headers across to all the lists. This was Milestone 4 feedback, where they were able to attack water. Found where that bug was. It was a typo in describing the terrain. That one wasn't too hard to find. There's another feedback item, hexes that attacked has a conflicting. So this is the conflicting. Well, I'll dig into this one. Has a conflicting message, and that's straight on. So essentially, once you've engaged in combat or engaged in sort of reinforcing the hex, you should not be able to do any buffing or anything else in that hex. Now there's a little bit of it's not immediately obvious playing through the game. There's a little bit of details on to whether or not I'm reinforcing from a source hex to a target hex. A target hex has not consumed its reinforce option. Only the source hex I'm reinforcing from has. So at that point I can still buff and reinforce from the target hex to somewhere else, continuing to move those troops forward if I want to. But once I've done the reinforcing, I can no longer buff. I've used those up. So that was spot on. It was just I reworded the message. Hopefully when we look at that, that'll be something a little bit more intuitive to the user. Another feedback item was the attack button BattleCry was still visible during the combat, so that was just managing the visibility on those, took care of that. Map selection details, show opponent's display name. This was just low-hanging fruit sitting out in the backlog. Instead of it just saying garrison attacker, I wanted to say your opponent's name. Again, this is all sort of reinforcing that you're playing against another player. Add the press and hover context menus. Now this isn't 100% every single place in the game. I'm sure there's going to be some other parts where a nice little press and see a pop-up explain what that is will be helpful, but for the most part it was in all of the places in combat that I needed to truly support the ability to apply buffs as I'm trying to make the best use of screen real estate. Some of the icons I just wanted to be able to press and hold and have you see what it says, and then it goes away. Showing the lists loading animation, as we saw during our first user testing. Some of the users that were on Wi-Fi looked pretty good, but if users were on cellular, the load times took a while, and there was no real indicator to tell them to wait. So this is sort of a first jab at giving the user a visual feedback that, hey, it's doing something, give it a minute and let it wait. And it's very effective. We discussed potentially other options on caching and stuff, but I don't like to make 5 and 6 different changes and then see which one works. Sometimes it's too many darts in the dark. Let's make a single change, test it, make a change, test it. Another feedback, combat was underwhelming, of course. At this stage, the primary objective for me, and again, this is just me not being cognizant of my silent partners, right? When I started Locath Industries back in the days of yore, I had a lot of silent partners, and I realized that they're not in the trenches with me. They don't see the day-to-day, so it's hard for them to understand some of the decisions. So part of this video screencasting change is to include the why of some of these decisions. So early on, the goal was just to make sure all of the data underneath the hood was doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that in fact it took it, it saved it. I was able to conquest. Not all the flash and pomp and circumstance wasn't there. So I did a little bit of upgrading of the combat system. I haven't gone still to what I think the ultimate conclusion is with fireworks and audio effects and all that stuff. There's going to be a whole section of this where I have an opportunity to put a better skin on some of the graphics and visuals and effects. But right now my primary focus was on generally just making sure everything works. But to the point of this feedback is I went ahead and made sure that it was in fact notable. Did I win or did I lose the hex? Did I win the game? Those type of things are now up in your face. And I improved the round by round mechanics a little bit so you can see what's attacking. And then, of course, once I got to the happy place, I added more complexity, which maybe needs some more explanation. So you'll see multi-colored X's flying up from each one of the units depending on the buff, if it's a hero, if it's a terrain piece. And we'll go over that when we get into the enhancements of the combat sequence, which is essentially this piece here. Again, speaking to the underwhelming and then doing a little bit of enhancing of the combat sequence was some backlog that I had gone ahead and pulled in here and grouped those together. Are we at the ultimate vision of that? Probably not. And then the other feedback was map scrolling. So I put a couple of hours into really digging in and trying to make the scrolling closer to my original vision. I think I've got it there. There's always going to be a little bit of tweaking here and there, but ultimately I'm in a much better place with the map scrolling than I was in previous milestones. So this is the introduction to Milestone 5. So what we're going to be doing in this new format is we're going to record on the tablet the particular issue. So we'll start with issue 2949 at the top of this list. We'll go over the code, and then that'll be one segment, and then we'll fade out and fade in to the next segment. So sit back. We've got a lot to get through, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 5, and what we're going to begin with this week is a little bit of backlog. We had perhaps not necessarily the best demonstration of the maintenance job from Milestone 4 that was set up. This is the Azure maintenance job that does all of the cleanup. The initial piping around the maintenance is the ability to switch the player for a lagging player who hasn't taken their turn. But essentially the whole point of the piping around this maintenance job is to streamline a process so that maintenance tasks can easily be created. We're going to create one that'll wipe out lagging games. There'll be one that'll clean up some of the delete from this week's milestone. For efficiency reasons, we don't want to be deleting directly from the tables and force SQL Server to go into re-indexing. But anyway, since we didn't do a fantastic job at really going through this last week, this is the Azure maintenance job itself. And we will be just doing a run now. But before we do that, to make these recordings a little bit easier, I am now team viewing on into my Windows environment. In my home network, I actually have a DMZ separating all of my Mac environments away from my Windows environments. So even though they're technically on the same wires, they're not within the same their same domain. And forgive me if my voice is a little bit hazed. I've been beating back the flu this week. So to get a better look at how this maintenance job works so that we can prove that it's doing it, I've gone ahead and I've selected this game. Now this is a game between me and Xander Bridges. So I'm Hearthdale and Xander Bridges is Xander. And it's currently whose turn is the aggressor. I'm the aggressor, that's Hearthdale. And what we're seeing here is that I have artificially modified the last updated to 3.11. Just because that's the column that the maintenance plan keys off of. And then we go ahead and we select these and we can see here's the game, and then this is all the transactional data for the moves that have been played. And right now the challenger ended his turn, which is why it's aggressor's whose turn. So I'm going to go ahead and run the maintenance job. And this takes a few seconds to run. Successfully started, so we'll let this go through its gyrations. And again, last week we saw the various success steps. It runs at 5 in the morning every morning. And we'll just take a quick peek here in the tables to see if anything's happened. And right now I'm not seeing anything has changed, so we'll go back and see if this has been completed. There we go. It looks like it just ran. Last ran at 8. We'll take a look at the history, and that's this time right here. And looking at the return, I got a 0 success. So it looks like everything ran fine. So we'll go back over to the team viewer. We'll reselect this stuff. Looks like team viewer is having a little bit of a hiccup. So I'm going to reach and run it there. And what you'll see is that it has added a transactional record into the table that says the aggressor has lost their turn. It has updated the timestamp to current timestamp, and the player's turn is now the challenger. And essentially, that's while we're just hyper-focusing on one game, that's the scheduler maintenance process in a nutshell. And ultimately what it runs is our daily maintenance task or procedure, which we did go over last week, but we'll just take a quick glance at it again. And again, the task passed into it is player, and we'll come down here and we'll get this positioned a little bit easier here. Scroll back. And you can see here from this get method that it is the maintenance task passing in a RESTful criteria called player. So hopefully that's a little bit better job at describing how the maintenance tasks work. And in backlog, we've got the same or a similar type of maintenance task where we're going to be cleaning up lagging games, where we'll be cleaning up, let me go ahead and just select battles in general here and see what else we've got. Let me just select star from them and see if we've got some queued up. And we'll come over here and take a look at statuses. Yeah, so one of the requests for this week was to be able to delete pending games. And we've also added the ability to surrender an active game, which makes it complete. But rather than having the SQL Server do this costly deleting anytime and every time throughout the day because of the indexes and having to rebuild the indexes, what we're doing in the game is just marking the game as revoked and changing the status so that it falls off the list. So for all intents and purposes to the player, they're gone. But to the system, they're just sort of changed so that it doesn't force SQL Server to go in doing all of its rebuilding of indexes. And then ultimately what we'll end up doing is having or adding to this tour procedure to do a maintenance tasks off of revoked, which will go in at 5 in the morning and clean up all those revoked games. And that, to me, that's a much better way to handle cleaning these things up rather than just allowing people to delete from the tables willy-nilly throughout the day. Just mark them for delete. We'll set up a maintenance task in Azure and let it run on a regular scheduled maintenance time. And depending on how much time it takes to do these maintenance, if it takes an hour, then this gives an opportunity for me to maybe flag in another table that maintenance is ongoing, and then as people go to log in, I can alert them, hey, maintenance is ongoing, try back in an hour. So there's a lot of benefits in staging all of these heavy server-side maintenance tasks to a specific time of the day. But anyway, this is, while we're in Milestone 5, I just wanted to close out some backlog. I don't think I did a very good job last week of really describing this. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more comfort that the SQL job is doing what it's supposed to be doing. The Azure scheduler is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and the middle tier is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 5, and we're going to be looking at add to friends list within a playable game. So we're going to go ahead and start it up. We're going to log in as Xander. And I'm going to go to friends, and I'm just going to go ahead and remove Hearthdale as a friend, since this is the game that he's in here. You'll notice that his friend icon has popped up there, so we're going to go back in. And you'll notice that there's a friend icon up there next to the exit button, so I can click that. Hearthdale is now a friend. Goody. I can exit out of the game without losing my turn. And I can go into my friends list, and there they are, a friend. So that is issue 2949. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is issue 2949. This is the ability to add to friends list within a playable game. So we've seen the little friends icon on multiple lists where you can click, and it basically just adds them as a friend. It's sort of a collection of people you want to keep in touch with and be able to easily create a game with. The spec here is that the button will appear if the opponent is not a friend already. Once selected, the opponent is added to the player's friend list, and the button vanishes. A pop-up confirming the opponent has been added as a friend appears. So we'll go ahead and start here in Unity, and we'll work on this top panel. And this is our friend button. You'll notice that it starts as disabled, and the on-click event is add friend from the game controller. So we're going to click over here in the game controller's update. It is making sure that the button is false. It's making sure whether or not we have our current player and battle loaded, that we haven't entered in here while it's still null. And if the player is an aggressor and not is a friend of the aggressor, or the player is the challenger and not is a friend of the challenger, and this is the is friend functionality, make it visible. So we'll dig into that, go into that declaration. It's the current player. And essentially this just iterates over the friends list until it finds a match and then results in true and breaks out. So once this button is made active, it becomes clickable. And as we saw before, the Unity action that is tied to it, just drag this up, is add friend. So in add friend, if, again, you're basically not the aggressor and their aggressor is not your friend, we'll use the player, the CP, current player, and we'll add a friend, the aggressor. We'll disable the button and then show the dialog. If you are the challenger or not the challenger and the challenger is not your friend, then we'll add the challenger as a friend using the current player utility class, disable the button and show the message. And if we go here add friend. Essentially, we're creating a friend object. We're setting up the ID. We're adding it to the friends list in your PD. It's serializing that into the player's device info. So this is the XML based status where we're storing friends, and then we call a save player. And the save player sets up all of my player prefs and reserializes itself. So this is just your helper function, and then saves my preferences locally on the device down to the device. And then if I've got my API ready, which I should by this time, it calls the API save player. Here's my callback. So we'll go to that. And this is basically turning on my spinner, serializing my object to JSON, calling my middle tier, and then doing the send request on the callback. And if I go back to my current player, this is the callback that's run. Go to declaration, and then essentially I'm just looking for errors and outputting the errors, and then turn my spinner off. Okay, so from beginning to end, that is adding the friends within the game itself. If you're making, or if you're playing a player that isn't currently a friend, you can add them from within the game as well. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 5, BattleCry, issue 2950, the ability to manage game settings screens. So we're going to go into the game. And for purposes of this, since we're going to be probably wiping out the account, I'm going to log in as a different player. Okay, so I blew out most of the active or pending or waiting games because they had a lot of breakage. But this is our settings menu up here. So we have a couple of things. One, we can change the display name. It's going to be better to demonstrate this if we create a game. This is us creating a game. This is us creating a game. And we have a game in pending, and right now you'll see the display name is POI. So I'm going to change this to -new, done, and say update, yes. And then we'll come back here, and you'll see it says POI new, and he has one completed game which also says POI new. And if you had active games, it basically updates his display name everywhere. If I silence players, I can go ahead and click on this. He has one friend. He is his own friend. Must be something we threw in the back end. But you'll notice that the Heartdale 1's audio button is grayed out, but that button isn't. On the high scores, looks like everything but his button is silenced, and you'll see that theme run throughout any of the games. You'll notice that if it's not him, the audio is sort of grayed out, just to let you know that we are silencing players. And if I delete the account, and before I do that, let me, how am I going to demo this? Tell you what, we'll have to come back to this, and I'll hit the delete account. Let me show you the data in the data. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 5. We are looking at issue 2950, Managing Game Settings. In the game settings screen, we demonstrated the ability to update the player's display name, tick a box that decides that I'm going to silence other players, and that'll affect all the replay audio icons from your opponent, and the ability to delete the account. So one of the things that I ran into during the screencast, if I delete the account there, then all the artifacts of what's going on with the account is already gone. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through all of the code pieces, and then I'm going to record the screen at the same time I'm recording on the device, and then try to use some video wizardry to pull that together. So first things first, we'll go into Unity, and we'll take a look at the settings panel. So this is the setting button up here, and essentially it's managing activity to turn the panel on and off. This is the settings panel itself. So I've got my display name and I've got my update display name, which basically goes to my setting panel script and calls update display name. My silence toggle. Found an interesting bug in the toggle component in Unity is that if I wire up the click event or on value change event, event here, it doesn't pass the appropriate value to the on value changed Unity action. So I wired up in code, and that seems to work pretty good. And then our delete button, which basically delete account. So let's take a look at the code. And before we get too excited, let's take a look at that do silence toggler. So I just remove all the listeners and then add this listener in code on start. Why this works and doing it in the declarative interface, I just have to chalk it up to a Unity bug. Essentially, it's checking to make sure that the current player object is not null. If it isn't, it checks the current player object silence player setting. If it's yes, then it toggles it on. Otherwise, it toggles it off just to have it staged. And then, of course, it's grabbing the current player's display name from preferences and adding it to the text box on load. So we have our update display name, so we'll go through that first. You remember the pop-up, it says, are you sure you want to update your display name to this, blah, 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 and it calls the update player name, Unity action, or close dialog. So here's the update player name, Unity action here. We close the dialog, then we go to the current player object, and we update player display name to whatever is pushed in there. And we're going to go to that statement. So here what we're doing is we're updating all the local player prefs. We're updating the player name, display name to what was passed in. We're serializing that, and then we're saving the preferences, and then we're calling the API to save player. And here's our callback. So this is starting to look pretty familiar. Turn on the spinner, serialize it to JSON, do the HTTP request, and send it. Come back, do my save callback, go to declaration, and this basically just runs through the gauntlet looking for errors, outputs it to my debug log, and turns the spinner off. On the toggler, what do we wire that up to? Silence players. This is my Unity action for value change. In this case, it passes in what the click was, again making sure that current player has a value in it. If I am clicking it, then I'm changing my silence players to yes, otherwise I'm changing it to no, and then I'm calling that save player. Which essentially goes through this exact same set of code. Okay. And then on the delete account, it pops up and says, are you sure you want to delete? Delete the player if yes, close it if not. Closes it, and then causes my current player objects delete player. So we'll take a look at that. So in this case, we set the player ID to delete, and we serialize everything, and then we save player. Go to declarations. And essentially we turn the spinner on, we call our middle tier, and we wait for the callback. And current player, and that's the delete callback, go to declaration. And then in here, once we're done deleting it, let's go back to the login screen. Okay, so before we get too excited, let's go back to our team viewer. And I know that this is a little bit tinier, but I'm hoping the high def has it show pretty good. I'm not sure how to zoom this from SQL. Shrink that down. Well, let's get the right things open. All right, so save player, update player. There we go. We don't need that for sure. And let's see if there's a zoom option in here. There we go. All right. So we'll zoom this open. So this is just prepping winner loser, holding some variables, some XML that stages who lost and who won. And as we get down here to player, update all games of players, new display names. So this is the logic that is managing, updating the display names. Every time a player's display is saved, any changes to the display name is updated to each one of their ongoing battles. If the player ID is delete, so that's where we saw here in the current player, we're in the delete callback, where we assign the player a delete and save. Where's my team viewer? There we go. It goes through and it revokes all the battles. And again, like you saw during the scheduling redo, we're not going to delete those battles yet. Just like we're not going to delete this player, we'll let maintenance take care of that. It's going to be too horrendous, particularly when you get into the battle class. Just to straight up delete from that table, because we're storing blob in the field, takes a long time per record to delete. So we want to offload that to a maintenance time or a maintenance window. We may end up ultimately, right now we're doing this at 5 in the morning, but it gives me the power at any point to change the schedule to we're going to do it on Sundays, right? And there's nobody can play on Sundays. So we're revoking any games that are in waiting status. So this is a pending game, whether it's a pending challenge or an open game I created. If it's my game and I'm either in the aggressor or in the challenger, then it's a game, either I created it or it's a game that I've been challenged. I need to revoke that game. If there's any games that are in game status, which means they're ongoing, I need to complete those games. I need to set the whose turn to see if I'm the aggressor, right? And set the aggressor to loser, set the challenger to the winner, as well as the same thing here. I need to update my battles to complete aggressor if I'm the challenger. And essentially what this is doing is this is just completing the game. Okay? And then what I do to really lock the account is I change the account's password to a new ID. So let's sort of see this in action. Let's go over here. Let's grab our players, and just to make sure that we don't mess with this, let's just comment that out. Where's the one we're messing with, this guy? So I'm going to grab this, and we'll just look at this guy here. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do a little bit of trickery here and go back into my phone. Turn on the record, go back into the game. Let me start the recording. Okay, and for purposes of the screencast, I am reviewing issue 2950. We are currently looking at the ability to delete a player from the settings menu, and we are looking at our Nick player right now. I'm going to go ahead and log on as him. Go to the settings, and I'm going to hit delete. Are you sure you want to delete your account? There's no turning back after this. Yes. And it takes me back to the login. So before I just arbitrarily set that down, let me stop the recording. All right, and I'll come back to that. And now let's take another quick look at this guy, and we'll see that he is a deleted player. His password is set to a GUID. Sorry, my mic cut off. And you'll see that his player ID is set to delete. His player password is set to a GUID, essentially locking his account out. And let's see if I can find any games that he was in. Select asterisk from battles where aggressor equals or challenger equals. And let's see if we got a game in here for him. We do. We got 2 of them. And you'll see that the complete one remains a complete because I don't want to mess up Hearthdale's completed games just because this guy decided to delete himself. But the active game that he created during the first screencast to show off his display name change has been set to revoke. So at this point, he'll be cleaned up in the maintenance run once we get through adding all of the rest of the maintenance tasks. Okay, that is Managing Your Game Settings Screens, issue 2950. Thank you. Okay, and for purposes of the screencast, I am reviewing issue 2950. We are currently looking at the ability to delete a player from the settings menu. And we are looking at our Nick player right now. I'm going to go ahead and log on as him. Go to the settings, and I'm going to hit delete. Are you sure you want to delete your account? There's no turning back after this. Yes. And that takes me back to the login. So before I just arbitrarily set that. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is BattleCry Milestone 5. We're going to explore issue 2951 using heroes and buffs in combat. Go ahead and log in. Take my turn. Alright, so we're going to start here. Now, from a hero's perspective, I've got a level 2 knight. From buffs, I've got flaming arrows and at least one flying mount. Flaming mount. It's probably not much of a buff. Alright, so I've targeted my cell and targeted a neutral cell. This X is neutral. These are sort of my little touches. We'll go over that. Attack. Alright, so I'm in an attack sequence, so before I do my battle cry, I'm going to apply my hero. And it says 1-1 hero selected, so I'm going to apply to combat. And if I pull it back up, I can see that he's applied to combat. I'm going to go to, and I'm going to give flaming arrows and flaming mounts. I can have up to 3 for combat. And then I'm going to do my battle cry. And it wasn't too good. Alright, but should do pretty well for this. I'm going to hit fight. Alright, so the red X's are the unit hits, the green X's are the terrain buffs, the black X's are the actual buffs, and the blue are the heroes. Alright, so I won. Your battle cry is indeed mighty. Yes, it is. Alright, so I've now taken that hex. This is where I'm at. I can't buff, can't do anything. But essentially we were using heroes and buffs in combat. So thank you very much. Hello, this is Evan Schwartz, Milestone 5, BattleCry. We are going to be looking at issue 2951 using heroes and buffs in combat. As combat ensues, as we select and pick our various heroes and apply them and pick our buffs and apply them to combat, during the combat sequence, we're taking steps to try to make combat a little bit clearer, a little bit more recognizable to the user on what's going on. So we've got a color coding set of X's here. So as the green X's pop up, that's the terrain. The red X's are the unit hits themselves. Black X's are any effects of buffs. Now, since you can have up to 3 buffs, those buffs are aggregated together, so you get a single X of all your buffs. And some buffs only affect certain terrain units, only certain units on a certain terrain, and so on. And then, of course, the blue X's are heroes, and heroes always select certain units on certain terrains as well. So all that stuff is taken into consideration in the background, and if you've picked and chosen your buffs and heroes properly, you'll see your X's helping out in combat. Okay. So let's start with Unity. Here we go. So this is our combat panel, and this is our hero selector, this is our buff selector, and this is our BattleCry, and this is the abort icon. So in the selector, we're basically showing these panels here, these the buff selector combat panel and the hero selector combat panel. So let's go ahead and turn the hero one on. And as we dig in, these are shockingly similar to all of the other lists. We have a hero data item, and on that hero data item it has all the controls, and we fill this list view, the scroll view web part with this particular data item, and then you can interact with it, and we have a load script. So this is our load select hero, and then we have our set script, which controls all the behavior on the individual datum itself. So we'll take a quick look at those, and I guess before we get too far off the mark here, the buff selector, shockingly similar, except that it's holding buffs. Same construct. It has a load selector combat buff script, and then of course it has a set selected combat buff data item that manages the behavior. And the last piece is there's a control panel at the bottom of these. Let me turn this back on. And in there is the apply button, and the apply button applies the buffs, and it's part of the load combat script, which we'll take a look at. So let's go over here to the code. So here's the combat hero and the combat buff item. As you can imagine, they're shockingly similar. So there's some helper methods here. Has a hero, go ahead and remove the hero. This is all done to, if I've used the hero in a previous combat, it'll pull it back out so you can't use the hero twice. This is the meat of it, to fill heroes, so it clears out the entire list, closes any pop-outs that might be there, iterates over all of the heroes, makes sure the hero isn't been used, and makes sure that you have at least a level 1 version of that hero. And then instantiates the datum, which is the combat hero data item, assigns all the necessary parts and pieces. This is all the just controller script that's passed down from the overall loader script, so the control view. So this gives me the ability for every data item to reach back into its holder and has access to the entire list collection. And this is where the specifics kick in. So, you know, what is the hero? What level is your hero? What's the description? Render out the hero. That just changes icons and stuff on the data item. Because I only have like one prefab data item, and it morphs into whatever the hero is based on its hero type. Sets the selector, which is the checkbox, to true. And again, a weird thing in Unity, the toggle UI doesn't seem to work if you wire it up in the editor. You have to wire it up in code. I found that to be interesting. And then default it to selected or not selected based on whether or not you've already applied this hero or not to this combat. And then essentially sets its parenting, sets its active. I keep up with a count because there's no guarantee as I'm moving throughout. I may have started my turn with multiple buffs or heroes, and I may have used them all. So it's a possible that at the end of it, while I may technically have heroes, they've all been used, so I haven't actually had an opportunity to implement a hero, and this gives me the opportunity to say, hey, you're out of heroes, why don't you go get another hero from the hero shop. And then the check heroes essentially just goes through, looks for selected ones, does a count on it, and is keeping up with how many of your heroes have been counted. And it sort of enforces the fact that you can't have more than one hero selected for combat. This is the apply heroes. You'll see something very similar to this in the buff. So at this point it goes through and it's looking for the hero that's selected, and if so, in the game controller I track who the attack hero is and then set it equal to that text, so that way when you go into combat I can look at which one of your heroes is currently the attack hero for this round of combat. This refreshed the list, so essentially pulling that hero off the list as having been used, and then sets my panel to false. Once you've applied it, it just closes that little panel. You saw that in the screencast. And then this is just some wire up stuff that kicks in on refresh, wake up, and so forth. If we go through the select cell combat buffs, you'll see very much the same type of wire up, except that it's going into a buff datum. I've got my pop-up messages here. Again, this is just some Chrome in case I need to say something. But get me the buffs object class based on the name. This is a buyback buff. This is a carryover for a do action item. If I want to do something interesting, I thought about potentially allowing you to buy an extra buff during combat, but this is just staging. This is a reach functionality if I get there. I didn't see a reason to make them back out of combat, go to the buff shop, buff up or buy a bunch of buffs and then go back into combat. But I don't have that in place yet, and that's not one of the requirements anyway. The render item, essentially all this does is just turn on and off the icons. I think we saw that here somewhere. Where's my render item? That's right. Here it is under the actual hero itself. This is the do toggle. So this is very similar to what we saw with the scheduler. When you click the box, it comes in here, it's true. It does a quick check buffs. We saw on the load heroes that it was managing a check buffs to make sure that the buffs were all still there. And if they were, then all is well. Whereas it does a refresh. This is the regular load heroes. Let me go to the load, this guy. This check heroes thing. So this is just enforcing that you can't have more than one. And when I look at my cell combat hero data item, it does the same thing here. If your check of heroes is good, then all is good. Otherwise, you've already exceeded your number of heroes, so it won't let you check it. This is a do action. Do you wish to consume this hero for attack? I had a piece where I was literally consuming this piece at the hero at that time, but I ended up pulling this out. This is sort of left here in case I need to go back to it during testing. But essentially, I haven't seen a way to cheat it where you load up all your heroes, load up all your buffs, but then I abort combat. So I didn't want to consume them too early. But just in case, I'll come back and implement that piece. Essentially, this is loading up from the combat perspective. Let me go to game controller, and we'll go to easier way to get there. Do combat, do combat. All right. So these are my constants for combat. So I have my attack hero and my up to 3 buffs. So as you can see, I've moved my consumption of these at the point of combat. I think it's a little kinder in case you needed to back out of it. At this point, I know who my heroes and the buffs I'm going to have in the game are. Similarly, I know who the buffs are for the hexes, but we haven't looked at that yet. Essentially, I'm getting all of my units, making sure that they have attackers, and as long as they have attackers, let's go through it. So this, we'll look at this in one section, but it's sort of repeated for defender, infantry, defender, cavalry, defender, archery, attacker, infantry, attacker, cavalry, attacker, archery. So I have unit hits, terrain buffs, garrison buffs, and hero adjustments. Okay. So since this is defense, this is the garrison buffs. You'll see this change to the attacker buffs when we get to the attacking set. So what this does is this is determining how much of your infantry hit on a 1 and 2 and gives me that total. And then essentially I apply my terrain buff defense. So I'm putting infantry in terrains. What does that look at? We'll look at one of these. So in this case, if I'm on plains and I'm infantry, I'm getting a buff bonus of 10 hits. So I'm guaranteed a minimum of 10 hits if I have at least one infantry still standing in my planes, right? So these are just the terrain buffs that are outlined inside the TDD. The castle didn't have any terrain buffs in the TDD, so I went a little bit off rails here and figured this is your home unit. It should give at least a minimum of bonus 10 hits for every unit that you still have units left. Okay, let's go back to do combat. So then we do the same thing. Here's all of the buffs. So this is apply buff defenses, so it goes through the same kind of gauntlet where based on what is buff 1 for infantry, what is buff 2 for infantry, what is buff 3 for infantry, based on the target. And then we do the same thing because sometimes the attacker's hero is a debuff, so then we include that construct here. And as long as the unit hits are greater than 0, then we're going to apply them. If none of your units hit, at least one of your infantry has to hit. Otherwise, none of the other buffs get to be applied, right? So if there's no hits, then there's no buffs. If you have at least one, then we will do all of your terrain buffs, we'll do all your buffs, and we'll do all your hero, which in this case really is debuffing. Right? And we sort of rinse and repeat this exercise for cavalry, and we do the same thing for archers, and then we get into the attack. And the big difference here is the fact that we're using the attacker buffs rather than the terrain, the targeted hex buffs that were stored with the garrison. And it still goes through that process, each one attacking and ultimately deducting off all of their hits and reducing all of those hits from each one of the attackers. And if all is well and said in the world, said and done, then you basically end up with, if you have no attackers, boom, you lost. If you have attackers, then attackers won, and you see the message it's won, and then you go to in combat options here and there. So depending on which one you've got, so we'll look at that in combat. And all we're doing is sort of closing down the pop-up. We're resetting our combat variables. We're setting our source and target to done so they can't do anything else. We're updating our selected hex, updating the map, saving the barbarian, saving the game. If the terrain that you attacked is a castle and attacker won, then you basically win the game. So this is, hey, you're the most most powerful barbarian in the land, victory. And or it aborts the attack and goes back so that you can do, and this isn't really abort the attack, this just ends the attack round. But I'm just reusing some of this code. So that's the entire attack process using heroes and buffs. Thank you. Hello, this is Evan Schwartz, and we're going to be looking at issue 2952 of Milestone 5 of BattleCry, which is Garrison Friendly Hexen Reinforcement. We're going to log in. I'm going to go ahead and play. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to target this X here. And you'll see my reinforce button has appeared. So I'll do my reinforce. So this is our reinforce screen. So I've got 66 in my source, 107 my targets. I'm going to move them all to my target. It's a progressive, so the longer I hold it down, the faster it goes. So you'll see that you can get quite a bit moved over. And now that's my target with the total between the two hexes. And once that's done, you'll notice that here I've done everything I can do, but on the target I still can do what I need to do. So this is just managing the rules. If they do combat or movement, they're done, but if they're the target of movement, I can still buff or I can still reinforce as needed. So that is target reinforcement, and I will go ahead and exit my turn. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is Milestone 5, issue 2952 of BattleCry. So this particular issue deals with friendly hex reinforcement. This is the ability to target a friendly hex as your source hex and select a target hex as your destination hex and move garrison units from one location to the next. All right, so we'll take a look at the Unity. So we have a reinforced panel that has all of these mechanics and widgetry on there. And these buttons ultimately are the pieces that do it. So these are standard buttons, but they don't have any button clicks on them. So they have a separate event trigger script associated with them. Whether or not they need to be buttons, I don't think that they do. But I wasn't really sure which way I was going to go with this or whether this would work. So ultimately this ended up working, and so it's just a button without a click event. Anyway, on the event trigger pointer down, we call move infantry target down, and on the pointer up, which means that my finger has released from it, on up, target up. So let's take a look at this code, and essentially going the other way from target, from source to target, and from target to source, you see the same sets of buttons, and they use essentially the same logic. So let's take a look at this. So in the move infantry to target down, what this is doing is this is setting a flag that is going to control it. What's the move infantry speed? So we're starting at 1, and again, the longer you hold it, the faster that it will begin to increment. This is sort of setting an infantry timer, and then it's basically setting the infantry countdown equals the spinner speed. So this is the sort of the countdown. The magic is in the update, and you'll see that you've got here's the source down, here's the target up, here's the source up. It's just setting flags and resetting all of these various helper methods, these helper variables, to maintain state. So let's go to our update. So in our update, we're doing one of three things. We're either moving infantry, moving cavalry, or moving archery. They all work pretty much the same. So we'll take a look at this one. So the first thing we do is to make sure that we have a source and target to move from. We'll make sure that the reinforced panel is active, otherwise there's no point in doing anything. And then we basically get a count on our source and our target infantry, and whether or not the flag is to move to target or the flag is to move to source. And we make sure that we have something to move. If not, we set our move speed equal to what we have. If it's greater than our move speed, we do our increments and our decrements. We update that the visual to our text objects, and then we update our reinforcement panel based on our source and target objects. Here the move infantry timer calculates if we're greater than the countdown, then we cut the countdown in half and we multiply the movement speed by 2. So we're basically counting down less and less, and we're basically moving over more and more faster. And that just comes down to however long you hold the button down. And essentially it's the same thing, just in reverse, moving to the source. So you see here's our move cavalry, looks shockingly similar, and here's our move archery, except it's moving the archery units back and forth. And if we go to our update reinforce panel, go to declaration, essentially all this is doing is mapping our source objects to our infantry, cavalry, and archery text objects, and this is doing the same for our target. Once that's said and done, we basically hit the save button, which is this button here, which basically says save reinforce. So we'll come back over here, go to the S's. And all this does is set our source target to done, which means that we can't do anything else with our source target. And then we do a quick save and we do the abort tack, which again, all the abort tack does is reset the game back up so you can get back to the game board. Quick save, all this does is update the map, reserialize down the object barbarian into its XML and then sends that to the server for citing. That is reinforcing troops in a nutshell. Thank you for listening. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and we're going to address issues 2953 and 2954, which is the ability to generation of resources after conquest, and players should have the ability to surrender. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And I think I'm going to switch players here. Alright, I've got 3 games. Let's go ahead and go into this one. This is a single game, so I'm going to exit this one without taking turns. I think that's going to be the one I'm going to surrender on. This one, as you can see, I have 41 resources, and I have a total of 64 I've collected so far based on all of these conquered hexes. So I'm going to attack one more, which ultimately, if I log in again, should change that 41 to a 42. That should be good enough to win. All right, so you'll notice it's still 41 right now because that's what I've collected, right? I would have to log out, the other player take their turn, and then I log back in to see that change to 22. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll change this back to Xander. And I believe his call sign is Xander Bridges. Alright, there's only one game that I've actually taken my turn on. Goody goody. And I'll go ahead and end it. And while I'm here, let's take a look at my high score. Xander is 913 wins. It's not going to matter because Harthdale is going to surrender. So I should see that go to 914. Alright, let's just reconfirm. Yep, Xander's at 913. And I'm going to surrender my game, which should have moved it to the completed game. Oops. And Xander went to 914. Now, let's go back into my other game, and you see down here it is now, you're currently generating 442 because I conquered this hex here last turn. So we are giving the ability to surrender. That's what the flag is up at the top of the screen, and we are generating resources after conquest. Those are issues 2953 and 2954. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and we're going to be looking at Milestone 5, BattleCry, and we're going to be looking at issues 2953, the generation of resources after conquest, and 2954, the player's ability to surrender the game. So as we come into this game and we load the game board in, there's not a lot of mechanics in here other than in code that renders out the entire map for lack of a better term. So in the map, we've got our game controller, and our game controller is going to load the game. So let's come over here. And in our battle callback after loading the battle, right, we call render map. And that's really what's going to drive all of the logic. So we say, look, load the battle. This is the callback piece where it ends on the loading. So we've seen tons of that. So it's all in the API to load the battle. And then it unwraps the JSON and puts it into the battle object that the game is going to manage from that point forward. And then loading the barbarian is just extracting the XML out of the battle and deserializing that into an object that we can more conveniently use. But as far as generation of resources, that happens in render the map. So as it goes through, it grabs the battle, rips apart the XML map board, and starts to generate and instantiate a hex, and then configures the hex to be a playing piece of the board. As it goes through, the first thing it does is it says, hey, is the current barbarian in the collect stage? If you are in the collect stage, as it's rendering a hex and as it determines the hex is owned by you, it will then begin to manage and collect resources. It collects your total income, and then it collects your total resources for that turn, and then updates your total resources within your barbarian. And then at the end, it changes you to maintenance mode. So essentially the goal here is, as you're coming for the very first time you render the map, you're in collect stage, then you can maintenance. If you end your turn, so this is the difference between exiting and ending, right? So if we just exit the game, we update the map, we save the barbarian. Are you sure you want to save the game and exit? Which is the Unity action that gets called if you say yes. So we'll click this. Go to declaration, and it just updates the game and then goes back to end your turn, which, if we follow that crumb trail, will take you and load back to the main screen. Okay. In that case, I'm just exiting. I haven't changed anything. If I end my turn, A, B, C, D, E, end turn, it does the same thing. You sure you want to save it in your turn? And if I want to end my turn, yes, I go to that declaration. Here I switch the barbarian back into collect mode. I've ended the turn. I'm also restoring all of your heroes that you may have used in combat back to usable. Update the map, save the barbarian. I create a little transaction that says you've ended your turn, change the turns back to the other player, and update the game. And then once again, exit and go back to the main screen. So that's how we generate resources. The player's ability to surrender. So let's take a quick look at that. Essentially, that's just in my game controller calling surrender. I'll go down here to the S's, surrender. And this is, are you sure you want to surrender? Go to surrender, yes. And essentially it's setting the current barbarian up as a loss, it's loading the opposing barbarian, setting them up as a win, setting the status to a complete. It's basically updating the map with a true to end the game. So in this case, it's locking down the board. I save the barbarians, I save the opposing barbarian, I create my transactional BattleCry that says, hey, I've surrendered. And then, I switch the turn to the player, so that way I know the last person's turn it is obviously the winner. That's a quick way. The other way is to actually look into the barbarian to see who won or lost that game. I update the game, and then when that is complete, I'm also updating wins and losses based on the player records. Right. So if you won, I update you. Your win, I load the player and update you. If you lost, I load the player and update you, and so forth, depending on whether you're the surrenderer or you're the one being surrendered to. And that is the crux of how all this works. So this is basically unwrapping it. Games played, games won, games lost, and I increment your games played, increment your games won, and then I map them back, and then I save the player. And then it's just basically the games played, games lost, and doing the same thing. So that is issues 2953, generation of resources after conquest, and issue 2954, players should have the ability to surrender the game. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is Milestone 5, BattleCry, issue 2955. When a player takes their opponent's castle, they should be victorious and win the game. So let's go ahead and log in. And I've staged so that Evan can win, or Harthdale, depending on your perspective. We're going to look at the high score real quick. So Harthdale has 708 wins. So we're going to come in here, and we'll scroll up, and I'm right there by the castle. I've gone ahead and had Xander retreat from his castle to make this as easy as possible. Easiest win ever. Easiest win ever. And I won. And you have defeated your opponent. You're the most powerful barbarian in the land. And again, right now this is just a designator saying you've won. We have an opportunity to rescan and regloss this. I expect this to go to a victory scene, something a little bit more wow and pizzazz, maybe even some fireworks other than the pop-up, but it is at least something that is denoting that you've won the game. Okay, so let's take a look at the high scores, and Harthdale is now at 709, so he did win. And let's take a look at the code. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is BattleCry Milestone 5, issue 2955, when a player takes their opponent's castle. So nothing significant happens within the Unity IDE as far as making this happen, other than ushering in the pop-up and that sort of thing. But ultimately, everything is done here at the end of due combat. When we've designated the attacker has won, we go into the end of combat, and we determine, was this a castle terrain? And if you're the attacker, since you can't attack your own castle, the assumption here being is if you've conquered a castle terrain, you must have conquered your opponent's castle, in which case you get the victory pop-up, and we go to the victory code. In this case, it's very similar to the surrender code. We close the pop-up dialog here. We designate you as the winner. We load the opposing barbarian. We designate them as the loser. We complete the game. We drain everything back into its standard savable objects. So the update map goes into XML. All the barbarians go into XML into the battles object. We create a cry for victory. And again, this is just a transactional cry. In this case, we don't flip the turn. We keep you as the last person that won the game. Again, that's one way to know who won the game, and this is another way to know it. It's going to come down to what's the easiest way to query the database. We update the game itself, so we essentially save it, and then we go through the player lost, player won logic here. So if I am the aggressor in this case, then I want to say I won, and the challenger lost, vice versa. We've already kind of looked at that in the surrender piece, and then we go to the in-game logic. And at this point, we do go ahead and set all this stuff back and resave it. And then we put in another transaction just officially ending the game. And then we update it, and at this point, we call back the end of turn, which takes us back to the main screen. And essentially, that's all it takes to win an entire game, is to take the opponent's castle. So, thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 5. We're going to be looking at issues 2983, allowing buffs to be added to a garrison, 2939, giving players the ability to revoke a challenge, 2975, allow players to abort combat if they have not yet created a battle cry, and 2932, list identification, adding a title to the lists. So let's go ahead and log in. Alright, as you can see, I'm on active games, and my list clearly states it's active games. I'm on pending games, I'm on open games, I'm on complete games. There is no list here. I'll go to the high score friends, and it clearly says friends, even though I said high scores. Good thing I got a list, title at the top of the list. So essentially, this is just speaking to something we saw during user testing is people were not really sure what the iconography was. And even though these are handwritten out labels, it just really kind of gives us an opportunity to hit home that. I think that with the spinning logo really kind of meshes that together. So that's the list identification. We're going to give players the ability to revoke a challenge. So I'm going to create a new one real quick. This is a new battle to be revoked. This is a new battle to be revoked. So one of the other outstanding issues is that it should automatically go to pending when I'm done with that. That's sitting in backlog right now. All right, so this is what I just created. I'll go ahead and tap that and let you guys listen to it. This is a new battle to be revoked. But one of the new features you'll see here, other than the audio icon, is the X icon, which gives, do you wish to delete this game? And I'm going to say yes. And you'll see that the game is deleted. Now, as we saw in the scheduling redo, what it's really doing is it's targeting the game to be revoked, and then a maintenance job later is going to do that deleting. Again, the reason behind that is when I started doing some cleanup on the database and trying to clear out the BattleCry's table, because we're storing binary blobs of audio files in there, the act of deleting it takes a lot for SQL Server to delete that and then reorganize all the indexes. So I'm going to relegate all that to a maintenance job. It's not going to cost me a whole lot just to mark them as deleted and then clean that up later. So that's really the whole impetus behind all of that. All right, so that's issue 2939 and 2932, list identification and giving the players the ability to revoke challenges, allowing a player to abort a combat. We've actually seen this already. So I come in here, I hit attack. I haven't done anything. Well, I don't have any heroes or buffs, but if I did, I hit this little X button and I can abort out of it. As simple as that sounds, and one of the things, you get too close to the trees, I oversaw or overlooked. I looked so hard I overlooked that particular need on Milestone 4, so that was pretty bad. So that needed to be in there. And that is 2975, allow players to abort if they have not yet created a BattleCry. Just to prove the point, we'll come up here, we'll attack, and I have now created a BattleCry. And at this point, I have now created a BattleCry. You'll notice that I can no longer abort out of combat. My only option is to fight. And that was another one of the little bugs, is that the fight icon was persistent. You could keep poking it, but now you can't really do that. So that's making sure that you can't really mess around with combat. I lost. That's disappointing. All right, and the other one is allow buffs to be added to a garrison. Okay, so let's see, I got 25. I don't have too much, so let's do a flaming arrow and a wall. That's a good one. And, well, they have to be unique. I don't have enough for anything else. So we're going to go to the home spot here, and I want to be able to, I've already attacked from it, so we'll do it from here. I want to be able to buff. And you'll notice our three little white stars with the evil eyeballs. Those are meant to be buffs. Maybe bad iconography there. I'll work on that later. So I'm going to apply my flaming arrows in my wall. That's 2 of my 3 buffs selected. You can see there. So I'll apply to sector. And you'll notice that they turn green. So when I hover over the white one, it says this sector is no protected in slot 3. Apparently I spent too much time in Mexico. And this sector is protected by a wall. This sector is protected by flaming arrows. This sector is no protection in slot 3. Me no talkie good. All right, so I'll get that cleaned up. But essentially, that is issue 2983. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is Milestone 5, BattleCry. We're going to be looking at issues 2983, allow Beths to be added to a garrison, 2939, give players the ability to revoke a challenge, 2975, allow players to board out of combat, and 2932, list identification. So let's go ahead and head over here to Unity. So we'll start with the ability to apply buffs to a targeted area. So let me get the right panel up. So this is our buff selector, and this is our buff selector panel. So this works shockingly similar to the way you saw in combat. I've got a load selector buff script, and then I've got a buff selected data item, which is a set cell buff data item, which is slightly different than the set cell combat buff data item, which applies buffs to combats. This applies buffs to various sectors. So all of the parts and pieces, let's go ahead and open up the buff item so you can see that. Essentially, whatever the buff type is how many do you have, what is it, what's its icon, description. The remove buff, hang on just a second, is controlled by the toggle. So there's some clarification that's going to be required in that, in the fact that when you read the requirements, it reads like you're not allowed to remove a buff once you put it on there. But that wasn't really the intent of the TDD. What it was meaning by that is you're not allowed to remove it and put it back into inventory. You can absolutely blow a buff away on a garrison if you don't need it anymore and you'd like to apply a different buff. So what this does is if the buff already exists, then essentially you can drop it, it blows it out, it's gone, it's like it was never there, and unfortunately you've wasted the buff, which essentially opens up the toggle switch where you can then select and pull from inventory your quantity another one. Right, so just wanted to kind of put a little bit more of a, sometimes the words, depending on how you read them, or even if you're the same reader months later, got to grasp what the original intent of that was. So you can in fact remove a buff from it, but it will not go back into inventory. All right, so let's take a look at our load. It's easier sometimes just to go right from here. All right, so this is our load selector buffs. This is shockingly similar to all of the other loader scripts that we've seen, so we're getting a lot of use out of this template. Do I have the buff that I'm looking for, right? This allows me to remove the buff, and this is sort of setting the game controller target. Since I'm adding to a garrison, I'm always adding to my source. I will never add a buff to a target. I'm not going to help the enemy. So essentially by removing it, if I'm match the one I'm trying to remove, it removes it from one of the 3 buffs available on the target. And then I repaint the hex, and that's what makes the little star green or white. This is how I consume the buff. So once I've applied the buff, I'll go ahead and consume it, and that takes it out of inventory. This fills up the buff, so this destroys all the objects, gets rid of the pop-up, sets my count to 0, and starts to iterate over my buffs. Make sure that I actually have a inventory of the item, and if I do, it wires up all of the what I would consider niceties. It's what hex am I talking about, get me my pop-up, who's my holder, this is my current player, API, and game controller, and this is my audio source. That's just sort of mapping everything down from the loader script down into the set cell buff data. This is where all the details are. So what's its name? How many do I have? What's its description? Go ahead and do the render item. This is shockingly similar to what we saw in the combat situation. Here I have a wire up for the drop it. So let's just say I come back to a hex that already has a bunch of them on there and I want to swap some of them out. I can free up a slot by dropping it. Boom. If I had a wall there, I'm knocking the wall down and I'm putting something else in its place. Right? This is basically my selector. This is the toggle, and again I'll continue to harp on the fact that there's no worky when I wire it up declaratively within Unity. That took a little while to figure out. This makes sure I have it. If I do, then I set my drop it and deactivate my selector. If I don't, I deactivate my drop it and activate my selector. Right? And then I count it. If for some reason I don't have any, this is just a way of saying, hey, maybe you should go to the buff shop and get some. Now again, in this situation, it's not as dire, but I've also flirted with the idea of, hey, I'm right here. How hard would it be, or how bad would it be just to buy the buff while I'm here? Again, that's a stretch goal for me. If things start to really free up here over the next few milestones, I might come back in and do that rather than having to back out of reinforcement, go buy the stuff, and then go back into it. It's just me being compassionate for the player. This is checking buffs, making sure that I'm within the constraints. I don't have more than 3 selected. This is my free up my map. So this is really the little pop-up window that pops up and says, are you sure you want to do this, blah, 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 blah. I'm having to put this in the numerator, wait a half second, and then set is on map, because anything that pops up over the map that I click on tends to drill through onto my map, the raycast. So I've got this global boolean that say, hey, am I on the map or am I doing a modal dialog? And if I'm in a modal dialog, then don't ignore anything that's cast on you. So what I needed to do is I needed a pop-up to be over top of it, but when I close it, it closes the whole thing when I say yes. But I needed about a half a second for it to actually close the window before it turns the map focus back on, or as I was closing the window, I was inadvertently selecting another hex. So you see this kind of wire up all over the place. If there's a better way, I'd like to hear it, but this was my solution to it. And then essentially closes out the panel. So this is the checkbox. This is just making sure that I don't have more than 3, right? If this particular instance would have caused me to go over 3, then I basically result false, can't do it, right? Otherwise, I update my selector to however many it is and then set, okay, you're good to go. You can keep going. So this is the apply buffs, and this is just sort of the gonculator that it goes down, boom, 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 and it basically, we know that this buff is selected, blah, 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 and make sure it's it's either empty or equal to none, and then I can add the buff to it and consume it. So this is me taking the buffs I've selected in my list and applying them to the sector, and that's also where the little green buff icons pop up. And again, I put a little touch over top of it, even though it was spelled horribly. Or the language was bad, I don't know if it was misspelled. But so that way you can see what was put there. Now, interestingly, if you're looking at an opposing opponent's hex that has buffs, you will see that they're green, so you'll know that there's buffs there. But when you highlight over them, it just tells you that there's some mysterious force protecting this. It won't give you the ability to deduce what that buff is. So you'll have to deal. Otherwise, it refreshes the list of buffs, and as long as the source isn't null, it paints the hex, does a quick save, so everything you've done, it saves everything back out to the map, saves it down to the database. So I'm constantly hitting the server, saving this stuff as you go, and this is all sort of in a huge overarching theme of trying to prevent someone from doing a swipe away to cheat. And then this is just managing all of the various panels, and then this is the little hokey wire up that it does a start coroutine, waits for half a second before it finishes closing everything out, so my click-through doesn't go all the way to the map. And this is our general wire-up stuff, not using these yet. I'm pretty deep in it. I feel comfortable. I could probably go back to the loads and take those out, but they're not hurting anything right now. And just taking a look at the data item itself, we'll go to that declaration. So again, this is telling me what hex I'm on. This is giving me the specifics. This is allowing me to control show or hide. I just want out the label stuff. This is all my icons. These are my functional pieces, the toggle and the button. And then this is all the wire up handed to me from my loader script. This is my pop-up, so I can ask, are you sure you want to do all that stuff? And then I have the, hey, get me this buff. So I want to find out the current Barbarian's buff and return it to me as an object. Again, this is that pre-wire up to buy a buff. I'm not there yet as a stretch goal, but I might end up allowing them to buy buffs while they're here. In the render item, this is just showing the appropriate icon. As we get into something a little bit more flexible on the buffs, I'm still playing with whether I want the buffs to have a more organic type description, but as it is right now, I'm managing them like they're organic, where they can have these very complex write-ups. But I may ultimately just get down to all a buff is a terrain, a unit, a attacking unit, defending unit, and an adjustment. And the hero does the same thing, but it's by level. And that gives me maybe something that's more editable, but this has given me the flexibility I need right now until I can balance things out and everything looks pretty good. If I drop it, close the message, I remove the buff, drop, and then switch it back to the toggle, and I set the selector default. So this is me basically blowing out that buff completely from the hex itself. So holder remove buff does that for me, and that's the holder class. This is me asking to drop it, and it's hardwired to go to the do drop it. This is my toggle logic, and again, I'm checking to make sure I'm in compliance, and if I am, then it's going to basically set itself based on that compliance level. Otherwise, it's going to turn it back off. So if it comes in true and checkbox is false, it sets it back to false, and everything's happy in the world. And this is basically, do you wish to consume the buff? Are you sure you want to do that? And that's part of the apply do action. Okay. So that's being able to apply buffs and add them to garrisons, giving the players the ability to revoke an action. So let's make sure that we set this back the way I like it. We've got our main panel. Everything here looks good. Save. Go back to the main screen, canvas, and we're going to look at my battle panel, and we're going to look at pending items. So let's get over here, zoom that up, deactivate that panel. So when we originally wrote up this particular requirement, squeeze that down, let's show that. Here's our X. All right, so when we originally wrote up this requirement, we were like, we need to be able to, delete active, pending, and open games. We need to be able to clear these lists up. And I'd already added in the surrender option, right? And that essentially is removing an active game. So that's what that is. Then when I did the pending games, I realized there was no point in doing it because really open games to me is everyone else's games. So I shouldn't have the ability to delete other people's games. So it really just came down to meet this requirement, I just needed to delete anything that's in my pending list and be able to surrender a game from my active lists. And so it really kind of distilled down to I just need to wire up this particular button. So the wiring up of this button is in the loader script for the pending games, which is load pending game script. So we'll take a quick look at that. And let's see, here's our revoke button. On click add listener, do revoke. So we'll go to that declaration, and that's going to be in its data item. You wish to delete this game, do revoke. And this is the show dial, and it's my dialog is yes. Go to declaration. And so if I say yes, it closes the pop-up. It sets the battle status to revoke. It updates it as today. It sets, because I'm deleting it, it sets the who's cry to no. If the challenge already is player, who's cry it basically is saying, hey, if I'm the challenger, set my who's cry appropriately. And I do that for my my BattleCry transaction so that I can record the fact that I revoked the game. Now again, this is just a transactional system. I'm not truly deleting anything right now. The maintenance job will take care of that, but there might be a useful statistic in there and how many people are creating a game and then deleting it, creating a game and then deleting it. One of my main concerns about this is that people use this as a way to sort of cheat the first game, right? I'm going to keep playing until I get the best BattleCry I can get. But I understand since I'm not showing the metric of the BattleCry, I'm not showing you how well you've done, that's kind of hidden. So the only reason I would really do it in that vein is if I had a known mistake. So I think I'm okay, but there's a whole host of things that I might want to just collect these statistics. So it's creating a transaction, saving the game, and the game will be in a revoked state. I'll have my transaction about it. It's data for me at that point. No one else sees it, and then I can just create a maintenance job to take care of it. Otherwise, that's everything else is wire up, and here's our FFT piece, parts and pieces that we'll take care of. So that is giving the players the ability to revoke a challenge. That's 2939. So let's take a look at allowing players to abort combat. That should be pretty straightforward. So we're going to go back to the game screen. I'm going to not save. Come in here, open her up. Here we go. Close out my main panel, open my combat panel. And that's essentially this button, and it calls abort attack. And we've seen that quite a bit here in some of our other videos so far as the abort attack script. So let me just go ahead and go back to it. It's in the A's, A, B, abort attack. So since we have a lot of scripts that call this is a pretty handy-dandy script that it closes all the panels appropriately, it sets all the flags appropriately. I had to do some similar kind of shenanigans where I'm starting a covering to set flags after combat enumerator so that I could do a yield. It's the exact same thing. I've got a pop-up. I'm doing something. I don't want my arrow click to go all the way through the map and move it, so I'm having to do this weird thing where, give me a half second, let everything else close out, and then set the flags, and by that time the pointer of your click shouldn't go through. And because the way I play the game here, I've got both mouse and touch wired up so that I can do all of my testing in my Unity editor. It's more prevalent with the mouse, but it's just a way to handle that problem. And again, if someone has a better way, I'm interested in hearing it. And we talked about abort combat, and we've seen the list identifications. Those are truly just, and don't save that. Those are just additions to the various maps. So if we, these are just extra panels at the top of each one of these list views, and I'm calling it a title panel. And so you can see where those are being put. And we just added this mechanic, and if I go up here to my friends panel, you'll see I have a title panel there as well. So that's essentially how I handled that. It's just added an extra panel section for that. Okay, so that is reviewing the allowing buffs to be added to a garrison. That's 2983, giving players ability to revoke a challenge. That's 2939, allowing players to abort combat if they have not yet created it. That's 2975, and list identification has no real code behind it, but is just in the editor, which is 2932. Okay, thank you. Hello, this is Evan Schwartz, and we are looking at Milestone 5, BattleCry, and we're going to be looking at issues 2984, 2985, and 2986. So let's go ahead and log in. 2984 is from the Milestone 4 feedback, which was reported they were able to attack water. That ultimately was a typo in the terrain recognition. 2985 is also from Milestone 4 feedback. Hex is that attack has a conflicting message. We cleared that up, but I'll go over that again. And 2986 is also Milestone 4 feedback. The attack button was still visible after attacking, so you could keep poking it, causing all kinds of chaos. Alright, so let's go into the first one. And right off the bat here, I've got a water hex, and I cannot target and target. I cannot target and target. So it's now identifying that water is not an attackable sector. Hexes attacked have conflicting messages, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and attack this guy and say, this is an attack, kill them all. This is an attack, kill them all. Yeah, it's not bad. Do a nice little combat there. Oof, took him out. Nice. Okay, so at this point it says this sector has taken an action this turn, and this sector has taken an action this turn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target between my source and my target. So I'm moving towards my home base, and I'm going to do a reinforce, and I'm just going to put a handful of them over there, nothing significant. And my source now says the sector has taken an action this turn, and target says sector has taken action this turn, and this. So this hex and this hex were in combat. They can't do anything else. They can't buff, they can't reinforce, they can't do anything. This simply reinforced over here, and according to the TDD, excuse me, you cannot do anything once you've attacked or moved units. So I can buff all day long. I can reinforce if my home port had not attacked, I could have done something from there, because at that point reinforcement's only affecting the source hex. Combat is affecting both source and destination hex. Okay. The third one is 2985. Hexes that attack. Oh, that was we just did that. So 2986 feedback, attack button, BattleCry still visible, as you saw in the last combat. But we'll go ahead and log out, log back in just to confirm that the attack button is no longer visible. All right, we'll log in as Hearthdale, and I'm going to attack that mountain territory. Oops. Attack! Kill them all! Attack! Kill them all! Well, let's see if we can get through it. But you'll notice as I'm going from round 1 to round 2, I don't have an attack button that I can push that can cause chaos. I can scroll the screen, but I can't really do anything with it, and you'll see the screen's all shaky. That's for dramatic effect. So hopefully we're getting closer to a less than not overwhelming. Not sure what the proper term is, but I won, so that's what's important. All right, so that was attack button, BattleCry still visible. Obviously they weren't. So that's these three. That's 2984, 2985, and 2986. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. We're looking at Milestone 5 of BattleCry, and we're going to review issues 2984, 2985, and 2986. Once again, I know we were looking at doing a single video per issue, demonstrated, walk through the code. There's so much wire up, and some of these are so really simple. It just made sense to group the smaller ones together rather than going through the entire rigmarole of recording on the phone, then re-recording on the phone, then converting it, then sending it to the other computer, converting it there, recording the screen. There's just a lot of wire up, so I'm trying to group some of these smaller ones to see if we can get through this. So on 2984, which was milestone 4 feedback, able to attack water. 2985, milestone 4 feedback, hexes that attack has a conflicting message. I think we cleared that up. And 2986, milestone 4 feedback, the attack button BattleCry was still visible during the combat. So I think we saw that those are gone. So a lot of that's just managing the appropriate visibility. Not a lot to this in the editor, but in the code base, we'll go down to the V's and valid hex logic. So for the water problem is everything else was plural, and I had made these singular, so it said water instead of waters. So that fixed that. I've got just a house cleaning note to take and revert all of these to constants, but at the time it is what it is right now. As far as the buttons, let's go to the game. Let's don't save that. Let's go to the map. Let's turn off the main panel. Let's show the combat panel. So first things first, we're looking for the abort button, and we're looking for the BattleCry button. And that's actually called the BattleCry button and the abort button. BattleCry button. And on attack, we're setting that to true, and we're setting this to true. And in fact, maybe the abort button will be a and this is in the end of after I've processed my BattleCry recording. We added the BattleCry button, and as well as the hero buff and the buff buttons and the board buttons. Turning these faults took care of that problem. And the conflicting message. That's probably not a good one. Yes, so here in our show sector action, I'm either coming to the conclusion that I can target for reinforcements, I can target as an attack object. As long as the status is not done, I can go ahead and basically do my buff. Otherwise, this sector is taking action this turn, which is essentially telling you, sorry, you've attacked, you've moved, but you can't buff. So that essentially is the code that fixed those 3 feedback options. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is Milestone 5, BattleCry. We're going to look at another small grouping of issues. Issue 2917, when I'm selecting the map selection details, show opponent's name. So in this case, when it used to say garrison, it now says your garrison. When I click on that neutral territories, it says Savage Garrison. This hex is neutral, needs to be liberated. When I click on enemies, it says Xanderbridge's Garrison. So again, this was really just low-hanging fruit to try to keep the player engaged and connected to their opponent. And that is 2917, map selection details, shows opponent's display name. In 2916, add the press and hover context menu. So you kind of saw me do that when I click on this red skull over here, or just touch it. It's sort of just a hold and press. This is an enemy hex, and when I lift, it goes away. When I do the little bag with arrows, you're currently generating 15 resources per turn. When I click on the 2 coins, this sector is worth 10 resources. When I click on the big stack of coins, it says you currently own 20 resources. And then I can click on each one of the badly grammatically written buff pop-ups that tell me what either there's a buff there or it's not protected at all. I don't think I have one. Yeah, here we go. So here's this sector is protected by flaming arrows. This sector is protected by wall. So that is essentially where the plug and hold are. So anywhere there's an icon that needs a little more explanation, I can implement this mechanic anywhere. So mainly was to get the functionality in and working, and we'll see how that's being done. And then show list loading animation. So let's go ahead and go to the exit. Say yes, you see that little circle spinning. That's essentially my loading animation, letting everyone know that I'm doing something with the server, and it's loading that information up. So I think that'll go a long way to the players who are just clickety click 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 all over the place, and at least that'll be an indicator, some sort of affordance back to them of, hey, the system's currently doing something, you might want to be patient. Okay, so that's the 3 bundled issues, and that was issue 2931. So once again, 2917 is showing the opponent's name when selecting the hex, 2916 is adding the press and hover mechanic, and 2931 is showing the list loading icon. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 5 for BattleCry. We are looking at issues 2917, map selection details, show the opponent's display name when selecting a hex, 2916, add the press and hover context menu feature, and 2931, which is show list loading animation, or some way to notify the player that activity is going on. So the first thing we want to look at, we're in the game screen here. Let's get out of combat. And let's just go to our main screen, is on this little garrison label here. We wanted to say it's either yours, it's Savage Lands, or it's your opponent's, and give your opponent a name. So in our game controller script, there's a display ownership as it gets into every time a hex is selected. It goes through and determines, do I show friendly, do I show a neutral sector icon, or do I show an enemy sector icon? But it also now updates the garrison label to, you know, opponent players, garrison, savage garrison, or your garrison. So that's how that works. On the, we'll go back here. On these little guys, these little touch and press icons, the way that we've done this is we have added an event trigger script. They're just images. And show icon, show income pop-up, and then it closes the message dialog. So what this is doing, and we'll take a look at that show income pop-up. Show income pop-up. So basically, as long as I have a current barbarian, I'm not in the middle of load or something of that nature, it'll show a message passive. You currently are generating blah, blah, blah. And if we go into that, basically it's setting up my message. But what it's not doing is it's not doing this is unmap false thing. Because my finger is basically tied up holding down the button. I have to hold it to get it to show. And the second I lift my finger, it does the up, which closes the dialog and reinforces, and I do a close dialog passive. So we're fine there. And that allows me to basically show that pop-up anywhere in the game, right? So if I was in a position where I had locked down the map, showing the dialogue and then taking it away is not going to open the map up. It assumes the map is what it is, and it doesn't do anything to do with the map. So it just pops it up and takes it away based on your finger. And that's essentially how all of them work. They all have their own little pop-ups and how that they do their things. And if there was, if you could see, let's see, the sector friendly, they all have it, enemy, neutral. They all call their little pop-up, and it's kind of like a context-sensitive help. You don't have hover on touch. Well, I guess you do on some devices, but in the iPhone, I don't have it. So this is how I handle that. And so that is issue 2916. Show the list loading animation. So the way that I handled that is I ended up getting a nice little script. I did a little bit of research around here. And where is it? Loading, progress loading. There we go. So I found Salas Games. He had a nifty little concept out there that walked through, and essentially it was just a rotating script based on rotation speed that would just rotate this icon. So this is really the script that does it. And then everything else is managed by visibility. Now we've seen that in a couple of places in the API access. Turn spinner on. Let's take a look at that. Go to that declaration, which is basically making sure that I have an assigned progress spinner and setting it active, and then turning it off wherever I need to turn it off whenever I'm done doing whatever it is that I'm doing. And all that spinner is, I guess I could have just jumped to it, but it's just a game object, right? So I just assign a game object, then I'm just going to show it and take it away. So technically it could be anything. It's really basic mechanic. And this is the spinner object here. So really what I learned from this site was this interesting thing here where I take an image and then put one underneath it, right? That'll display over top of it, change its color. But based on its radius, see how that green goes up and down, it creates a radial subsection of the image, which sort of gives me the ability that if I'm rotating just this piece, it goes around and around and looks like a little spinner. So all I'm doing is in my API scripts on each one of the scenes, this guy, I'm just saying, hey, where's your spinner? And I made a prefab of it and dropped it into the canvas on every scene, assigned it to the API handler that handles all my API access, because that's really where I want it to show that we're busy is every time it goes out to the server. And then it turns the spinning on, and then whatever the callback function is, its job is to turn it back off. And that worked out pretty well. So ultimately, that is issues 2917, map selection details showing the opponent's name. 2916, add the press, hover, and context menu. And show list loading animation 2931. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is BattleCry Milestone 5. We're going to look at the last 3 issues, which is issue 2987. This is Milestone 4 feedback. Combat is underwhelming when you complete it. As to who won, you had to look at the color of the hex, so we added some pop-up messages to make that more declarative to the user that they won. Issue 2974, that was backlog, which is to enhance combat. We already knew that it was kind of sluggish and hard to read as far as the X's, so I went ahead and based on the Milestone 4 feedback, brought that into Milestone 5, and we laid out the X's to make that a little bit more trendy so that you could follow the combat sequence going around the infantry, cavalry, and archers. And then also based on Milestone 4 feedback, the map scrolling seemed a little bit sluggish. So let's go ahead and log in. And we'll start the game. So we'll work backwards. Let's look at the map. So I can actually now toss the map from one side to the next based on the velocity of my finger swipe. So I can swipe very deliberately, or I can give it more velocity by giving it a quicker, faster swipe. So it definitely feels freer. You can move around a lot better. So hopefully that'll make it a little less feel like a lot of effort to move around the map. Okay, so we're going to look at the combat sequence. So I'm going to attack from my home base, and we're just going to go ahead and attack in here. Raw! Raw! And that's a respectable fight. So you'll see that the green little X, that's a terrain bonus for infantry, and cavalry get a terrain bonus when attacking on infantry, which is why you see a little green X around them. So that's essentially you're seeing the combat go back and forth, and you've got a better feel of who's doing what amount of hits as the rounds. So that lasted 4 rounds. You won. I get a nice little pop-up telling me I've won. Your battle cry indeed is mighty. There's going to be plenty of opportunity to really pizzazz and brighten this up when we do the full skinning and graphics piece to it. So that's essentially the underwhelming piece. Let's see if we can't intentionally lose. Nope, don't want to buff it. Just kidding. Let's attack this one. Let's attack it, and I'm gonna be blah 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 blah. Okay, I should lose this one. Alright, so if I go through the fight, they've pretty much wiped me out first round. Well, I might last 2 rounds. Yep, I get 2 rounds. I had 2 guys left. Oh, you lost. Your battle cry needs assistance. Try adding buffs or heroes. So this sort of gives the player a little feedback in combat, and hopefully that'll make it less underwhelming. And a little bit more enhanced so that you can see the X's and sort of follow along with the combat a little bit. And then of course the map scrolling allows you to really kind of get around a lot better without finger fatigue trying to scroll from one side of the map to the next. And of course you can still select your X and it'll try to center it as best it can. Alright, so that's the last 3 features there. I'm going to go ahead and exit this turn and let that fall out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my camera because of all of these demonstrations. I haven't really shown the Android piece, so I'm clocking this in to the last just to sort of show that while we don't have to visit every single piece of it, I just want to show that it largely is doing the same construct that you're seeing on the Apple or on the iPhone. You see in the Android, I have all of my list headers and I have all of my parts and pieces. I can go into my game and it'll load. So I've got my little spinny icon. Unfortunately, loading scenes, it won't animate at the same time, but it is what it is. And I can do my attack, and I've got all the same types of screens and things and that I would normally have. I can abort. I've got my my finger swipe, so I can definitely swipe it and give it some speed, or I can make it more deliberate and drag it around so it has that freer look to it and feel to it. So it's got the little pop-ups, and I've got all my surrender options and functionality, but generally just wanted to show that I've got pretty much the same functionality on my Android that we've seen details on for the iPhone. So that'll conclude. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is BattleCry Milestone 5, last 3 issues. Issue 2987, combat's underwhelming. No way to know whether you won or lost other than looking at the hex color. Enhance the combat sequence. The X's just seem to fly in all kinds of directions. There's no way to track combat. That's issue 2974. Pulled that from backlog. And issue 2989 MS4, that was Milestone 4 feedback. Map scrolling just is fatiguing. All right, so the first one we want to look at is the combat side. So we'll come back here into our game controller. We'll look at our do combat. And essentially, as we go all the way through the combat sequence, we've already kind of looked at this, but this is producing those X hits and putting them next to the particular infantry unit, cavalry unit, whatever unit is issuing the attack. So this is the actual hits from the unit, this is hits from terrain, this is hits from buffs, and this is adjustments for heroes. And we do the same thing for cavalry. So that's the X's kind of going up. And once it goes through all of its various combat gyrations, also, I'll just show you this piece here real quick. Go to this declaration. I've got my shaker in there. So that's that was my camera shaker. So we'll take a quick look at that. Because you saw the little map shaking around. And really what I'm shaking is the camera. So essentially, if you set a shake amount of greater than 0, then it basically starts to move the camera around within a unit sphere. So it's just creating random points within a sphere times shake amount, and then deducting it based the decrease factor times delta time to have it shake for however many seconds, and then once it's 0, it sets it back to its original position. So it just, and you can imagine when we have sound to that, explosions or clanging swords or what have you, that'll make that a little bit more exciting. Okay, so go back to do combat. Let's grab it. So at the end of do combat, when all is said and done, we know who the winner and loser was. Again, last week it was mainly just getting the piping and saving everything the way it should be, but I understand the expectations. People wanted to see something more. So if you lost, it'll tell you lost, and then go to end combat. If you won, it'll tell you won, and then go to end combat. Now again, this is just laying some more brickwork to be able to maybe make that a little bit more exciting, throw off some fireworks, play a trumpet, you won, or you lost type of thing. Circus or a sort of, Hearthstone's torn up banner if you lost, or, exciting glowing banner if you won type of thing. So if we get to a point where we're putting some high gloss on it, there's going to be an opportunity to really jazz it up. And if it gets into combat, if you actually won the game, then you get another little pop-up message and event that says, hey, you won, and then goes through the victory rigmarole of closing out the game, put it in completed folder, and doing all that stuff. So that kind of handles issues 2931. 2987, which is the underwhelming part of the combat. Hopefully this makes it a little bit more intuitive, and granted it's not where it needs to be, but it's a lot better than it was. And 2974, hopefully you can follow the hits a little bit better. You know that these infantry are actually doing the hits, and the attacking infantry are doing these hits, so it's gives you a little bit better sense of, ooh, that was a big one. And, there's all kinds of interesting things we could do. We could resize the hexes based on how big the hit was. Again, going back to Hearthstone, the big hit, and boom, and you have a little crowd, ooh, kind of thing. So there's a lot of interesting things we can do to kind of spice that up. But ultimately, just trying to get get the thing working right now. As far as the scrolling is concerned, that's in my swipe logic. So spend a little bit of time playing around with that. And when we get to the swipe detector, I had all this logic in here, and it was swiping and you were done, swiping and you were done. So I got rid of all this, and I'm just grabbing my force and grabbing my magnitude. I have to divide it by 20, otherwise, poof, I was all the way to the other side. So that seemed like a pretty good fit. Android's a little bit slower than iPhone, so I may end up tweaking this depending on the device. But I need a little bit more than just my AT&T $1 tablet as a benchmark, I think, for this. But essentially, once this is set up, we come down here into the updater, and if I've got a power of greater than 0, I basically do all of my force normalization, get my velocity, and this ultimately is the factor where I'm multiplying force times power over time and then updating the position of my object. Now, so in this case, I am actually moving the entire map object. And then I have a reducer that is reducing my power. I can't use the physics in the game for some reason. That would have been nice, and the very first iteration of this looked beautiful, except for the fact that I can't raycast through a rigid body for some reason, and the raycast stops at it, which I get it. I'm supposed to detect collisions to the rigid bodies. So in this case, without a rigid body, I can't use any of the built-in physics. So this was my answer to that, and then I'm essentially just reducing my reducer or increasing my reducer over time as it goes through, and then eventually power drops off and it stops. It came out pretty natural. There may be some tweaking here and there left to do, but that generally was light years ahead of where I was. So I'm fairly pleased with that. So that is the issues 2987, Combat Underwhelming, 2974, Enhance the Combat Sequence, and 2989, Map Scrolling Needs to be Smoother. So that basically ends the Milestone 5. There's quite a bit still sitting in Milestone 6 that needs to be done, as well as backlog. Chief among those is going to be the visual debugger to kind of really dig into the BattleCry and make sure I'm getting out of it what I think I'm getting out of it, so that we can be a little bit more balanced in the way that works. I may be making a harsh assumption as my first knee-jerk that the padding of the 192 bytes is occurring at the end, and in fact the padding of the 192 bytes may be in fact occurring at the beginning, which is why I'm seeing those large field of A's at the beginning, which means I'm shorthanding my inventory, which would explain why I'm seeing a kind of curvish effect, not nearly as much on my archers, but there's definitely something in there. So hopefully in Milestone 6 we'll get that worked out. I'm going to be in Europe all of next week and half of the following week. So Milestone 6 is going to be a challenge similar to Milestone 4, but I will continue to bang on it. I appreciate you taking the time to sit through this. This was sort of an introduction to a new way to do these screencasts. It's taken me right at 9 hours to do this, so hopefully you don't have to sit through 9 hours of it. It compresses down. Thank you.